This video distills the key arguments from a strategic analysis that presents a revisionist perspective on the Empire of Japan's involvement in the Second World War. The central view of the video is a provocative one. Japan's role was most secondary, but much overrated. This viewpoint challenges the conventional narrative that often portrays the Pacific War as a titanic, near-equal struggle between two determined powers. Instead, the Today story contends that from a grand strategic standpoint, Japan was never a genuine threat to achieve ultimate victory against the Allied powers, particularly the United States, and its defeat was an inevitable outcome dictated by fundamental imbalances in industrial capacity, resources, and strategic positioning. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd also love to read your comments. Let me know where you're watching from. Japan's role in the Second World War is often portrayed as more significant than it actually was. In reality, its strategic contribution to the overall conflict was secondary and frequently exaggerated, especially in Western narratives. Much of this exaggeration stemmed from early British assessments in wartime propaganda, which tended to overstate Japan's military power in the Pacific to emphasize the global nature of the war. Early campaigns, a dramatic start but limited impact. It is true that Japan's early military campaigns were dramatic, unexpected, and initially very successful. The rapid invasions of Burma, Malaya, Indonesia, and the Philippines in late 1941 and early 1942 shocked the Allies and demonstrated Japan's ability to strike quickly. However, beyond these early operations, the momentum largely stalled. Despite these territorial gains, Japan failed to secure any major strategic victory that could have significantly altered the course of the war. By 1942, Japan was already under severe strategic threat from the United States. Its forces were forced onto the defensive, fighting desperately to blunt U.S. counterattacks across the Pacific. Strategic miscalculations. The gamble in India. One of Japan's most serious strategic errors came in 1943 to 1944 when it attempted a major offensive against British India. This move was a catastrophic miscalculation. The British Indian forces, supported by overwhelming numerical strength, superior logistics, and abundant supplies, easily outmatched the Japanese army. Japan's failure in India highlighted the deep flaws in its grand strategy and the unrealistic scope of its ambitions. Japan's decision to go to war with the United States, one of the world's most industrially advanced nations, sealed its fate from the beginning. The U.S. possessed overwhelming superiority in manpower, industrial output, technology, and logistics. Japan was never a serious contender for victory against the U.S. Although Japan won early battles, such as the capture of the Philippines, these victories held little strategic value. They did not bring Japan any closer to defeating the U.S. or forcing a negotiated peace. Japan's war strategy relied heavily on fanatical resistance and a willingness to accept mass casualties. But this approach could not compensate for the vast gap in industrial and military capabilities. The Second World War, particularly in the Pacific, became a contest of industrial capacity. The critical question was which side could build more aircraft carriers, the most decisive naval weapon of the war. Here, Japan was hopelessly outmatched. U.S. shipyards could produce aircraft carriers far more quickly and in far greater numbers than Japanese industry ever could. After losing 4 carriers at the Battle of Midway in 1942, Japan's naval power was effectively broken. It never recovered from this loss. To grasp the scale of the imbalance, during the war, the United States produced approximately 52% of the world's aircraft, 36% of all artillery, 48% of all vehicles, and 61% of all ships built globally. In comparison, Japan's industrial output was a fraction of this. The outcome was inevitable. Japan's strategic situation was bleak. In the West, it faced China, which had vast manpower reserves and was supported by the U.S. and Britain. In Burma, the challenging terrain and the material superiority of the British Indian Army made Japanese offensives unsustainable. In the East, Japan confronted the United States directly. However, the U.S. mainland was located too far away for Japan to realistically threaten it. Japan lacked the naval and air power necessary for such an assault. In truth, Japan's decision to declare war on the U.S. and Britain was made from a position of defensive desperation after both powers imposed crippling economic embargoes. Strategically, Japan never came close to seriously challenging or defeating the United States. The material gap between the two nations was simply too great. Even in conventional land combat, Japanese forces were unable to inflict decisive losses. For perspective, the United States suffered roughly 50,000 fatal casualties in battles against Japan, compared to more than 170,000 fatalities fighting Germany in North Africa and Europe. This comparison underscores how much less of a strategic threat Japan posed compared to Germany. In the grand strategic picture of the Second World War, Japan's role was ultimately secondary. While its actions in the Pacific caused significant suffering and prolonged the war, Japan never had the capacity to defeat the United States. The real strategic contest lay in Europe, where Germany, not Japan, was the principal opponent. Even there, it was not the US alone that delivered the decisive blow. The Soviet Union bore the brunt of the fighting in Europe and played the most decisive role in Germany's defeat. Japan's contribution to the global conflict was overrated, its early victories were short-lived, and its strategic defeat was inevitable from the moment it chose to challenge the world's most powerful industrial nation